How's it look? How's it sound? Radio voice. Here at Simmetri headquarters. How's it laying down in the booth?
Pretty good.
Audio levels look good. Feel free to let me know if the audio levels don't. If the audio levels get too weird. That might be a little louder than me. Let me know if there's anyone joining us. I'm going to play around in VR as people arrive. This will be today's landscape. I just pulled this together to make a nice little place for us to hang out and learn. And I've got some a number of VR interactions taking place. Super basic ones, but great ones to learn with. I've got physics, I've got color stuff, I've got audio that's spatialized here, meaning that it lives here on this, speaker. I have as well some buttons that can make it nighttime or daytime, nighttime, daytime, nighttime, daytime. And I've got some things that make things appear and disappear. So I will exit from VR for a second and we'll begin the lesson shortly. All right. So I'm going to go back through. This scene in VR, and this is going to be where we're learning today. First, I'll introduce myself. I'm Max Harper here with Simmetri, and I am not a programmer from the beginning. I've had kind of an interactive mixed media, arts design, professional video background as well. So getting into VR and learning scripting is something that has been a little bit of a focus over the last year, and I love the kind of magical stuff that it lets me do and build and play with, and I'm excited to share some of that with you. We're gonna, start at a starting point, an entry point for learning script and coding in Simmetri to make VR experiences. And I'm going to show you just things that are kind of fun right off the bat. I think that's always what got me hooked with Simmetri in this medium, in this art form, is doing something interesting first and seeing where it inspires me to now learn more and dig in. You'll notice that we've improved from yesterday on some levels. You'll see the key callouts in the bottom of Simmetri over here. If I press the left mouse button, the right mouse button, if I press Control plus T, you get to see all that. So that's going to help you kind of follow along. I'm reasonably experienced here, and once you get experienced, you start doing little key codes, and I might not or little hotkeys that make it easier to do things here. I might not always name them out and call them out. Feel free to comment in the YouTube chat while we're streaming this live, and feel free to leave comments afterwards, asking questions. Say, "Oh, I didn't understand what you did there at 3 minutes and 40 seconds." We will try to be very speedy to getting you an answer there. So yes, so today's lesson I'm calling Push the Button, and the focus of it is to create VR interactions where you just laser using your kind of inbuilt Simmetri VR laser pointer at something. You point at something, kind of scrolling over it in space, and then clicking a button on your VR controller and making something happen. And I'm going to show you this series of them that we have here, and then we're going to build them one by one, and each one's going to kind of teach you just a little kind of micro lesson about scripting here in Simmetri. So yeah, what we're going to do is introduce ourselves to VR in Simmetri and into these scripts that make these interesting things happen. So let me give you a tour really quickly. And what you're looking at in front of you is the scene that I set up. I used the terrain tool in Simmetri to raise the mountains and quickly kind of paint them this dappled colors that they are. I used Google Poly to pull in a few objects, and we'll put the notes of who these belong to, the Creative Commons information in a little bit later. We've got a speaker from someone and a tree. So I just brought those in here. Then I've got some text and these buttons that we're going to go press in VR. We're going to fly through here and press them in VR, and then things are going to happen. And it's going to be fairly apparent what happens based on what these labels are going to do. We're going to make it night or day. We're going to make things disappear and reappear. We're going to play some audio. We're going to make something jump up in the air, this rudimentary rocket, and then we're going to change this color, the color of this label itself, called color change. We're going to change that into these various colors. So it should be pretty fun. What you're looking at, we're looking through the terrain space viewport. This is the viewport for our main camera right now, called default camera, and that's the one that we can look around with. We're using the right mouse button, and you can hold down right mouse and hit any of the WASD keys and kind of fly around. You can kind of navigating this flying camera to get yourself to different positions and vantage points. This contraption, this where you see this camera icon and these little controllers, that's our VR rig, and we're going to learn a bit more about that after I fly through here. What's going to happen when I press VR present down here is we are going to, you're going to start seeing what I'm seeing. You're going to see a single, what's called monoscopic view, like a single camera view from my vantage point. I'll be in here. I'll have these two things right here. These laser pointers are going to be my controllers, and where I point them, I'll be able to fly and I'll be able to interact with some things. Again, I'm going to teach you a lot more about that here very shortly, but I just want you to understand what we're about to do. When I press VR, we're going to basically begin presenting this overall Simmetri show, and when we do that, you're going to be seeing from my vantage point and watching me interact. So I'm using an Oculus Rift. I'm going to be putting that onto my head now, and I actually see in Simmetri. The one other thing I meant to mention is we are in what's called VR mode. So if you have your Oculus Vive, your HTC Vive, your Oculus, or a Windows mixed reality device all set up, and you press this VR button, it's going to launch Steam VR, and you're going to be ready to. This present button will now show VR. I'll show you, redo that. Now it's just a present button. Click VR. This is red now. We've gone into VR mode, and we're ready to be in VR in present mode. So here we go. We're going to go into VR. We're going to fly through and just see our basic interactions. Then we're going to learn about VR. Then we're going to learn about and reconstruct these with the very simple scripts that they are. Our marks, get set, go. Headset on, reaching for controllers, and in front of me you can see left hand and right hand. My left hand is what I call my magic broomstick, where I point it I go, and right now I'm pointing it up, so I go up. I'm pointing it down, so I go down, and then I've got buttons on the controllers that let me interact with these in-world buttons, not my controller buttons, but these in-world buttons. And you can see these are just sort of they sort of show two buttons. I'm going to teach you about that in 1 second. So, nighttime. This is a function that just basically changes the time of day in the world. So if I click it, we've now gone into nighttime and the stars come out. I added a little extra brightness to them, and there was actually a light sitting here in the broad daylight, which you weren't able to see, but it helps us see things in the middle of the night, and I put it there for that reason. We're going to do that a little later. So nighttime, daytime, nighttime, daytime. Cool. making things appear. Thought that this is super useful. You can get a lot done just setting up a world and then just uncovering it with maybe it's a story, maybe it's a poem, maybe it's a language learning application, maybe it's looking at 3D models of organisms and you want to make like a little educational module. So making things appear by pressing something. I click this red button and life's hidden flowers show up, and this is just something a little super quick sketch of something I made in Tilt Brush that I brought in. Just a group of those flowers. Simultaneously, I changed this text. When I press that button, it now says make things disappear. So I press the gray button and now I want to make things appear. Make things disappear. Disappear, appear. Very nice. So yeah, so you can imagine bringing in visual models or text that guides you through different, you could go through a whole story. So just with this little micro lesson we're going to do today, you could be off to the races to making a whole story flying through a world. Says go over here, go over there, now touch this, now do that. Just with this two lines of script in here. So this is a fun interaction. Playing audio similarly, you may, whether you're sort of building you might be building a narrative kind of experience where you're playing, like a narrator saying, in the beginning we did this and this and this, and then things appear, and then in the middle we did this and this, and at the end we did this and this. Or maybe you want to, make kind of like the equivalent of an instrument or something in VR. This is really simple. Again, this is also like just 2 lines of code. And I laser over the yellow button. And I'm pretty sure our live stream gets this audio to you. I'm hearing it certainly in my Oculus speakers. The technician in the booth, Amadeo, who taught you yesterday, says he's not sure. Maybe maybe all the voices out there in Radio Lab can call in and let us know. So, okay, good. Good. Either you hear it or I hear it. So now I think you're hearing it. Hopefully not too loud. And that audio. This is this 3D. This is a 3D model I pulled in from Google Blocks of some speakers, and I made it grabbable so that I can grab it and move it around. We'll teach you about how to make things grabbable. It's super simple. And the audio lives on it. So if I get closer, it should get louder. And if I, take it and throw it over here, it should be quieter. Cool. So that's playing the audio. Now we're going to make something jump. So this is physics stuff, and I love to play around with physics almost as much or more than anything in Simmetri. And right now what we do is we have this object that has what's called a rigid body. For those of you who are new to VR creation, that might be a new term. The rigid body is the computer's representation of this thing's kind of physical model. Is it colliding with things? Is gravity interacting on it? Does it have momentum? Does it have velocity? What's its mass? What's its friction? And this is a really simple, also 1 or 2 lines of code that basically applies. It's a little function that applies a little impulse right at the center of gravity of this object when I press the green button. And if I press it repeatedly, I have a pretty rudimentary rocket launch. It's not exactly SpaceX, but just kind of cool. And you can see that it kind of has that fluid physics where its momentum rotationally is kind of kept, but it keeps getting these little impulses. So you could do a lot of fun things just really quickly with this. You could sort of build up some physics games with these types of things. And a little later in the 30 Days of Symmetry, we're going to go much deeper into some of the physics things, but that's make something jump. And lastly, what we're going to do is changing colors. And so when I press one of these, it's going to make the color of the text the color of its self. And that word self is key because we're going to learn that for a very particular reason. It's a word in Lua code terminology, the scripting language that we'll be learning. And the self color is the color of this object. And when I press it, it says, hey, give me this thing, and then make its color the same as myself. And so these are all press the button. So this lesson for today is press the button. We're going to change color. We're going to make something jump. We're going to play audio. We're going to make things appear and disappear, and we're going to go in and out of nighttime. So I'm going to take off the VR, and we're going to go back out to what's called pause time and then stop time. And we're going to view a few things, and then we're going to kind of create this from scratch. Pause time. We call this pause time. You probably can see this. There's a little green border around the Simmetri UI, and that means that we have the changes that we've made in the world still exist. Like this guy and the speaker, they still live where they live, but as soon as we hit stop, we could hit play and resume from where we are, but as soon as we hit stop, things will go back to their original positions in their original state, their original way of being, how I, the editor, wanted them to be, which means the flowers are going to hide, the rocket comes back, and yeah, and so does the speaker. So we'll hit stop, and you'll see exactly that. And we're back at the beginning. So very cool. So we're going to teach you kind of about this VR rig and just walk you through getting into VR, and then we're going to do these one by one, adding nighttime. We're not going to build as beautiful of a location, actually let's just build it up right here in this location. I'm just going to trim these away. We'll do it right here in this location. I originally had thought we might go out to a fully blank slate. But it's so pretty here. I feel like staying here. I'll just blank out the slate for you guys. So the first thing we're going to learn is just about this VR. What is this VR? What is this VR rig here? And that's going to mean we're going to be looking over in the hierarchy panel, and I'm going to collapse all this stuff to kind of make it clean. So just a little introduction to the hierarchy. The terrain space is the space that we're in. The very first, this top one is the one we're in. We live in and underneath the universe. So this is our terrain space, and everything that we put in this space, the buttons, the trees, and the VR rig live in that space. The default camera is the one that we're looking through at the moment. That's when I'm moving around. That's us in the default camera. And then I've grouped these items. A group is just a collection of these items that are over here. So you can kind of keep an organization in Simmetri using these groups. So this is the tree group. That's all of these trees back here, which you can now see me moving. So anyway, this is the group of the play audio stuff. That's the play audio button, and inside of it is its speaker and the button and the sound that's on the speaker and the play audio. Anyway, you get the idea. These are each one of these are these little interactions, and I love to keep my Simmetri shows organized for this matter. And the VR rig is what we're going to be working with to build our VR and therefore create our scripting interactions. So I'm going to actually delete this VR rig, and you're going to watch it come in from scratch. So I'm going to delete it by pressing delete, or this negative button here down at the bottom of the hierarchy. So I'm going to press the negative button. And now we no longer have that VR rig that's in this space. And what I'm going to do is in Simmetri, go over to the toolbox, and I'm going to come to the VR selection. It's like fourth from the bottom, VR AR. And I'm going to select VR rig preset. So preset, I'm going to tell you what that means here. A VR rig, let me tell you what a VR rig is, and I'll tell you what preset means just after that. A VR rig is a set of objects that relate to your VR headset. So the VR rig, it's just an empty node. It's just the top level is kind of the container, and when you move it around, just like that group, it's not exactly a group. It's called a unit, but when I move it around, everything else moves. The camera inside of it and the children, we call these children objects, like the parent and the children. All the children move around. So the left hand is underneath here. So you have three things under the main rig, and these are kind of the three things that come out of that are part of your VR system generally, right? So if you have a Vive, you've got two controllers and the head-mounted display or HMD camera. If you've got Oculus, same thing. Windows Mixed Reality, same thing. So these three items get their information from your system through Steam VR. They're going to get their position and rotation, where they are relative to one another. And actually, this object, the parent to all of these, gets its information from when you calibrate your system. When you set it up, Vive or Oculus, they basically let you find on the ground plane something that you're calling center. Well, this object right here gets that center. And then if you're wearing your camera and you're 6 feet tall, your HMD camera is going to report back that and you're standing right in the center, it's going to report back that, hey, I'm standing at 2 meters or 6 feet, directly above this position. And then if the right hand stretches out to the right, it's going to report back, I'm basically, a little ways up and over to the right from this center point. And the left hand, same thing. So these three are, this is getting its information one time based on the calibration of your system, and then these get it every frame, and that will be 60 times a second, right? Or 90, depending. Yeah, 90. So these will get 90 times a second. These are getting information, and what you see is that you can actually see I'm holding one of my controllers, and you can see that it's rotating around. It's getting that information even here in what we call stop time, right? No, we haven't pressed play. So you can see that the laser coming off of my controller is moving around because it's getting that data. Okay, what else? Well, on each hand, you also have a representation of which all of the three devices that we support. They all tend to have a grip trigger and an index trigger. The grip trigger is the one that you're squeezing kind of at your palm, and the index is with your pointer finger or index finger. That's sort of like the gun, trigger. And then the grip trigger, yeah. It's the one on kind of the side of the Vive controller, or yeah, there's that one you'd probably hit with your middle finger on an Oculus Vive. Sorry, I keep saying that, Oculus Rift. And then the laser pointer, which is extending off of the hand, and you'll be able to, if you want to like unpack it, you can see that there's this little pink indication of script that lives on the laser pointer in the hand. That's all there to enable some really simple interactions that make it easy for you to just drop in a VR rig preset and begin flying around your space and grabbing items. And so we're going to learn a little bit about that system. Not all of it. We're going to go into it in more depth, but we're going to just learn how to kind of fly around the space. And then we're going to kind of move on to writing these like individual scripts. So anyway, so this is what your VR rig contains. When you drop in the VR rig preset, what preset means is that we've assigned functionality to the buttons, meaning if I put in this VR rig, I want to just immediately press VR, and then I know that I press a certain button, I'm going to, on my VR controller, that I'm going to get a certain outcome. And so the primary things in the preset is that on the left hand, on its index trigger, we have this little piece of code that's called fly. Like I said, that's how I was flying around, and that's the magic, I call it magic broomstick, kind of like Harry Potter style. Wherever I point it, I go. And we'll unpack that a little bit more at another time. And then on each of the grip triggers, we have this generalized thing called interact, and that means that that's using the grip trigger on the left hand or the right hand. See, on the right hand, interact, grip trigger on the left hand, interact. I'm able to press these buttons in the space. I'm also able to do some of the things that are in our pre-packaged interaction system. And so I'm going to show you a little bit of the interaction system here now. So, like I said, when you go into VR mode, you can fly around, and I'll demonstrate that again here. But I also want to show you how I can grab something. So if I place an object in the space, I just drew a cube. So I went to Entities, Box, and I just drew a box. I have a thing over here called Interactions, and under it I have a number of things that you can play around with after this lesson that are pretty fun, like attracting, making it pull everything to it in the space that has physics on it, repulsing, slowing down time, all of these things. These are kind of pre-packaged, just fun versions of these interactions in a sense. These things that I just demonstrated and that we're going to learn, these all live over here. And the two that I'm using a lot of the time is grabbable fixed. Is probably the main one, which means that I'm going to make this object grabbable so I can move it around. Like you saw me grabbing you saw me moving the speaker and the rocket around by grabbing them with the laser. So I'm going to make this object, this box I just drew, I'm going to change its color so you can know. It's the yellow one. The yellow one is grabbable and the white one isn't. So let's check out grabbability. So we just had placed a VR rig, and it's the preset. And what's going to happen is the VR rig on the grip trigger of my left hand or right hand, I'm going to be able to quote-unquote interact with an object out in the space. And that means that it's going to basically run, do this kind of magical function or whatever, which is this kind of pre-packaged interaction. So grabbable fixed and fly I'm going to demonstrate to you now. So again, fly is on the left hand index trigger, and interact is on the grip trigger. So if I go into VR, headset on, controllers in hands, I'm going to use the fly, which is the pressing of this top button of the index trigger on my left, which means I can fly up in the air, point it down, and I fly down. And now I'm going to use the side buttons, the grip triggers on either hand to interact with this yellow box. And on the white box, nothing happens because I haven't set any sort of, I haven't placed a prepackaged interaction on it from our interaction menu in the toolbox, and I haven't written one of these scripts on it, which we're going to be doing today. So anyway, so if you want to be able to kind of fly and move your world around, these are some of the two first basic things you might do. So again, flying, pointing left index, you can kind of fly and move around, and interact using the side. I'm using the grip triggers. And then the last thing I'll note on this, I'm going to exit now. The last thing I'll note to you on this is that this is the preset VR rig. And there's a blank VR rig over here under VR. There's a blank one, which, if you place it in the space, I'll actually do that now. If you place a blank VR rig in the space, blank, you'll now know that first of all, it doesn't have lasers. Maybe you don't want lasers. It doesn't have fly or interact. But if I were to make the preset one, I could make it from scratch. So I would use add laser, and I could add the laser to the left hand and the right hand, and I can add press to fly to the left index trigger, and press to interact to the grip trigger of the left hand and the grip trigger of the right hand. So just like that, I rebuilt the preset rig, and you could, using a blank rig, kind of set it up however you want. So that's a little bit about the VR rig, and how you will fly around in it and how you will interact with things. So the next part of this is we're going to learn how to write one of these button press interactions. And yesterday, in the first tutorial in the 30 days of Simmetri series of videos, you learned how to use a trigger in this space and have a sphere roll through that trigger and make something happen. We're going to be doing the same as well here. We're going to be doing a similar thing here, but it's going to involve press to interact. And so the very first thing we're going to do is just draw the absolute basic thing, and we're going to do a print statement. Printing hello world, always a basic lesson. So I'm going to draw a box. Entities, box. I've got this simple little box right here. And what I'm going to do with this box is I'm going to make something happen when I click it. So right now when I click it, nothing happens. And I'm going to exit VR mode just for the moment. And when I present this, excuse me. The VR rig wants to be the center of attention when I present. I will not present. So I'm going to make an event. I'm going to make a little interaction right here for when I press this, or when I, with a mouse from this screen, or with a laser in VR. So let's print a statement from this. So how do we make a press event? So here's the main thing this is the biggest #1 takeaway for today. This is the foundation for it all. I'm going to go to stop time. Right here, select your object and go to its property editor. And this is where its image, the way that it looks, the material that's on it, its shape, and its lives. This is where its physics lives. So you think of this as look, its physics. This is if it goes through a trigger, does it activate that trigger? These right here are called attributes. These have attribute behavior and qualities and properties to this box entity. For example, its shape can be controlled here. This is the shape attribute. So we just need an interaction attribute. So selecting our box, we're going to basically come up to the top line here, and it's this little magic triangle right here where we're going to add interactability. Interactability right here, interactable. We're going to add +, add interactable. So that's the interactable attribute. So this is the thing that kind of makes you be able to click it with the mouse or with a laser. So what do we have under the interactable? Let's take a look. You have these things called events. If you don't see them, you need to expand this down. And you've got these events. Think of this kind of like, on a website or whatever, but this is when you press it. This is the moment that you press it. This happens. This is an event that's happening while you are pressing it, while you've held the button down, your controller or mouse thing. That's happening this entire time. And you can see these helpers, this little help text over here, right? It says emitted every frame while the user holds down the interact button. Exactly. On release, this happens exactly when you let go. So if you want something to happen only while you're pressing it and then stop being that way when you release it, this is a place where you're going to change something at the release moment. And then hover on and hover off is when you scroll over it, when you don't press anything down, but your cursor or your laser kind of rolls over and intersects with it. So that's hover, on and off. And so what we're going to do is do a press event, and I'm going to show you what happens there. When we press it, we're going to print "I've been pressed." So the way you do that is on the interactable attribute under the event on press. Event is the scripting term for the thing that happens, that unique event of being pressed or being hovered on. So what happens during this press? So when I clicked on press, I got this Lua script window. And what happened is it made me this nice little function that happens from between here and here. End is the end of the function. And I can create new space in here. Empty lines don't really matter in here. They're one of the few things that doesn't matter in here. Besides that, everything you put in here has to be proper code. And if you don't write it properly, oops, it doesn't work. So we're going to basically say when we press, I want to do the following thing: print. And print is a special function that when this script gets run on this onPress event, print happens, and we're going to print something. Print "I've been pressed" in all caps. It's definitely yelling at us. All right, so we have to be in playtime for the scripts to be runnable so that they can run. So we're going to enter playtime, and then we're going to click on our box. And you'll see this, you could kind of think of this as a console, or this just readout that comes over here to me, the editor. And you'll see our little key press thing here, left button. So I'm clicking it on them with the mouse, with the I've been, so there we go. So, and every time we press it, it says I've been pressed. And we're going to do just another one. We're going to use on hover on. So let's say hover on. I want to make something happen when I hover over it. So let's check that out. So if I click on hover on, watch here as I click that. It gives me another one. It's nice. It just sort of says, oh yeah, let's set you up with another event. And so I'm going to make a little space in here in my on hover function that'll happen on a hover event. And let's just print something else. Print open close parentheses. Clearly what gets printed is what I put in here. It also has to be this type of I can't just print anything in here. It has to be a very particular type of thing. Watch, if I press print A and I hover, it does not like that. It expected a string and it got nil. So what that means is it expected something to be in quotation marks or be a reference to something that is quotation marks. And we're definitely going to be doing a lot more of this, but we will just make sure that when we're doing our prints right now, we have quotes on it. So let's just say hovered. So when we press it, it's gonna print I've been pressed, and when we hover, it's gonna say hovered. Ready? Hovered. You see hovered, hovered, press. I've been pressed, hovered. There you go. So you could keep doing those events or doing those events and these functions, and you can build all kinds of stuff. So that's the basis for all of these other things that we're going to be doing today. Is this add the interactable attribute through here. So this is a review. We're going to come up here to this little triangle, We're going to add the interactable attribute, selecting the interactable attribute, choose which event you want to create. Pressing it is going to open up this script, and it's also going to create this little thing called object script, which is the reference to this whole chunk of all of this text, all of this what's called a script. So that is the script. So on press, it's gonna give us an on press event. Hover on, it's gonna give us any of these that we press is gonna give us something over here. And now, how do we get back into this script once we close this? Well, a number of ways. When I select this object, you now see which is called box entity. You can see it here called box entity, and it's got this little pink icon showing it's kind of the bracket / bracket, which means it's got code. It's got code on it, which means it has an object script. And you see this, it says that's the same symbol right there, object script. So you can get into it a lot of ways. I'm going to show you all of them now. One, box entity up here, I could right click and hit edit code. This one, I can right click and hit edit code. Or in the hierarchy, I can right click and hit edit code, and I get into the script. Or I can select it, I can come down, and I can double click object code or object script, and I get back into it. I could right click and hit edit code on object script and get into it. So many ways. Whatever is convenient to you, use that, and know that it's going to be the compilation of all the script that you've put on it. So these exist after the interactable attribute is on it. Cool. So that's how do we press and we make something happen. So we pressed it and we make a press event happen. So from there we can move into some of these. We're going to move into these lessons. The first of which is we're going to press a button and make something turn into. We're going to do the nighttime one, which means we're going to change the time of day, and we're going to have a second one here, a companion button that's going to change it to daytime. So we're going to learn to draw a couple entities in order to make these things happen. I'm going to delete our friend here, this box, and we're going to start from scratch and build up the nighttime button. So what I did over here was I used what's called a rounded cylinder entity. It was a quick way to make a button. So under the toolbox, under entities, under rounded cylinder, I click in the center, drag out to get my kind of outer radius, then I let go, then I drag up to get my height, and then I click and drag to get my corner radius. Cool. And I've got this button, and like anything in Simmetri and Playtime, any of these entities, it's going to have its active rigid body, and it can kind of move around. But let's take it back to where it belongs. And what I decided was I'm going to make these things colors so I can kind of remember them. So if I select my object, I can come up on its top level. Over on the right, I've got an easy little color option. I'm going to make this one, well, midnight blue. Perfect. And then I wanted a label for this one just so that we remember what it does. And so that's under entities and text. And then when I click down the text, I need to sort of raise it up, and then pressing, going over to rotate or pressing E, you'll see E switches between move, rotate, and scale. So if I put it on rotate by pressing E, I can now rotate this up. So now I've got a nice little label. And the text, of course, has a property here called text shape. This is where you can change its font, and let's go ahead and do that just for fun. Let's use something kind of cool looking, whatever, audio wide. Cool. All right. And I'm going to make it a little smaller. So fonts, I'm just going to bring down the size. And this is also where you change the words that are in it. It's not the name up here. That's the name of the object. The actual text that's in here is inside of mesh model, inside of text shape, where there's font and extrusion. You can kind of make it thick. So I'm going to change this word, text shape, the text. And this is going to say, what do we call this? Nighttime. I'll do all caps. So nighttime. Okay, so now we've got our basic setup. I'm going to actually copy this out a few times so that we can repeat this and just edit this for our other objects, so we don't have to repeat all those steps. So I'm going to select both of these, lasso select nighttime and the button, and I'm going to just hold down Alt, and you can put it anywhere, or if you hold down Shift while you're carrying it, it'll constrain it to one of these two axes that you're moving it along. Nighttime, we'll start off with, we do nighttime, make things, play audio. Let's do one more. Let's actually do one more after that. And we're going to change the text in each of these. So that's nighttime. What are we going to do? Make things appear. Text shape. We'll do them all caps. Make things appear. Text. Play audio. Make jump. And finally color change. Great. Blue, like this one. I'll just change these colors for you. Orange, yellow, green, all right. So we have our setup now, and just like that box that we were using, our buttons now need to be made interactable, because if I press play and I click on it, nothing happens except this editor window. When I double click, it says that's the fast key in Simmetri to edit its shape. That's what double clicking will do, but that's not actually causing anything to happen in the world. There's no script running when I click. So to make script run when I click, we add the interactable attribute. Selecting the object, right up here, go to this little magic triangle, add interactable right here. And then again, selecting interactable, we're going to make our on press event. This will be quite become familiar by the end of this tutorial. I'm going to edit my script in stop time, but you can do it in play time. I'm going to be in stop time, and yeah. So to make nighttime, what we need to do is change a property. So what property are we going to change? Well, turns out the time of day is stored here in the sky. So if I just lightly click the sky space, I can now open the property editor, and I'm looking at the sky space, and I've got all these cool things like clouds, where I can change how many clouds are in the sky and that kind of a thing. The thing that I'm going to change is here on the top, which is time of day, and we did some of this in yesterday's lesson. So I'm going to jump to the time of day from, we'll go from 14 to whatever night. We could be just right around here. Let's do something like 17 for this one. So 17 hours from midnight and 14 hours from midnight. So I need to get the sky space property into my script here, my function, my press function that's on this button. So the script window will stay here open as I go around and select. It's not based on what's selected at the time. It's whatever script was last opened. So if I double click here, or any of those ways I just taught you to get back in, if I hit edit code, that code is going to stay there, and this is important. It's going to stay there while I select other objects. You see, that's the same on press event. If I select the sky, I now can access some of these objects and attributes that I can change. So here's the one that we're going to work with, sky space, and with the time of day. All right, so the time of day property of the sky space. So I need to get the sky space object into my function, into my onPress function. What does that mean? So now I dragged this icon of sky space into the script window inside between function and end, and then now Simmetri does this smart thing where it says, oh, sky space? I know where to find that. And it uses this unique ID, find object by unique ID, and it knows where to go get it, like its social security number. So sky space. And now what I need to do, now I have this is a variable, storing an object. The object is the term, meaning it's storing sky space, or it's going out and saying, okay, if whatever I want to do to sky space, we're going to start by calling it this name. So what we're going to do is change one of its properties, like we did yesterday with the dot, the little dot operator is what it's called. So sky, we have to type it exactly the same, or we can copy and paste it. So sky with the capital S, space with the capital S. However it came in written up here is how you need to write it here. Again, copying and pasting is quite simple there. So sky space, this is the object, and then just sort of like a system of folders, you know, on your computer system, like your file folders. We're gonna go down a level. We're gonna go get, you know, kind of a file in this system, and is a way that I think about it, by pressing dot. So it's sort of like on the sky space, go down to this particular property, and so any of these little guys in gray here, time of day, time of year, night sky, planetary tilt, those are properties that I can now access after this dot. So sky space dot time of day, and that's what I'm going to type in, is time of day, and I'm going to type it in a very particular way, time of day, and that's what's called camel case. You start off, the first word is going to have a lowercase, and every word after that, to distinguish the word, is going to have an uppercase. And this is just a coding convention, and it matters in Simmetri. So anytime you're going to talk to one of these properties, you're going to lowercase the first letter and then uppercase the first letter of each word after that. So time of day, sky space dot time of day equals. What does it equal? Well, let's see. So if we start off in the world and we're at 13, we said we wanted it to go to 17. So we can just give it a number that we want it to be. So let's try 17 and see what that does. So what I can do is click away from my my script window. If I just click onto the ground and I press play, the script window can stay open while I press play, and I can see if my script worked, and it did. We can see that it went to this 17 hours, what is that, 5 o'clock. Must be winterish. We must be in winter if it's this dark at 5 o'clock in the northern hemisphere. So, but now you can see that I don't know what to press because we've gone dark. So let's solve that with the addition of a light. So this worked. And when we press stop, everything resets to its state, the condition that it was in before we press play, and we can, you know, fiddle again with our show. So let's put a light in here. Lights are pretty cool. The one that we're going to use is the spotlight, which basically points in a particular direction, as opposed to a point light. Feel free to use whichever one makes sense. We've also got a couple others in here. This one's projects a texture. It's it's the equivalent of a projector, and this projector actually is connected to a camera, I believe, right? So you'd click on a camera with this projector. Anyway, we're going to use a spotlight, and we'll just click on top of the blue button and raise it up a little bit, and then when we press play this time and we click it and we go into nighttime, you'll see that our spotlight is now shining on our button, which can help us press it again or press its companion button. So now we've got this nice little spotlight, and we should be fairly happy. So what do we do? Now we need to, make it daytime. So, okay, so daytime means that we have to get the skyspace.time of day back to 14 or whatever we want. So how do we do that? Well, we can draw another button, and we could draw that button and put on the interactable and drag in the sky space and do all that. I could sit here and show you that, or just rewind and repeat it and change this number to 14 on the next object. But here's another thing that you can do, and you'll find this brings you some interesting effects and some efficiencies. What if we just clone this object? Just make a copy of it by holding down Alt and then drag to copy. We'll hold down Alt and we'll drag this guy over. We now have this kind of unique copy, and it carried with it this script. So this script was it had the interactable, and it has a non-press event, and it has this object script. And so let's actually change this color, and then we'll go in and change the script and see how easy that worked. Let's just make this a daytime color. How's that? Maybe a little more yellow. Ugh. Move this. Oops. Make it a little brighter. There. So this button, if I edit the code from the blue button, it says 17, and if I edit the code of this newly copied yellow one, and I hit edit code, it still says 17. So what if we change this to 14? Let's just double check. Right click on edit code in the blue, 17. Right click to edit code on the yellow one, 14. Okay. Let's see if this works. We'll press play, and we'll press the blue. And we can't see the yellow one really, but it brings us back. Later in our series, we will teach the animation functions that allow you to make that the transition into night fade into that nighttime and fade back out to bright time. So I just moved the light up a little bit so that it will capture it can glow on the white. I'm gonna make it give it a little bit more of what's called area radius. That's gonna make it a little bit brighter. So when I press play and I make it nighttime, I can now see this other one that I can press to make it daytime. I'll bring the light just a little bit farther back, and oops. I'm in playtime, so I need to commit that transform change, that playtime transform change. Otherwise, when I press stop, the light jumps back. So if I press play and I move it, we will tell you this numerous times. If you move something during playtime, Simmetri wants to reset it like it did to all these other objects. So when you press stop, it goes back. So if you do move something during playtime and you want it to stay there, you can hit Control T, and you'll see it says committed transform changes. That's also under edit. Where is that? Not under tool. No, object, I think. Let's see. Is it under view? Hold on, tool. I always just use the fast one. Commit transform change. Object. Oh, it's right here. Yep. So basic. Commit transform changes. So if I hit Control T, so let's do that. We just moved it. It's green. The play button's on. It's green. We moved our object and we want it to stay there because we're playtime editing. Let's hit Control T. You'll see transform changes committed down here. Great. So now when I hit stop, it'll stay there, which is great. And again, play, nighttime, daytime, nighttime, daytime. All right. We have completed the introduction to VR, the introduction to adding interactivity, and we've created our first interaction, or first two really, the nighttime set, which is nighttime and daytime. So let's move on to making things appear, and I'll move our nighttime, daytime. I'm going to select them all and just kind of slide them over here to make a little room for making things appear. Okay, so making things appear. I'll close the script window and we will start fresh with a new button and a new interaction and a new script. and we will make things appear. So what did I make appear over here? I made, let's see here, I made text appear and a tilt brush file. Actually, I made this on I'm going to probably use, I'll use like a Google Blocks file or something that'll come on in. Or we'll just use a basic entity, and we'll show you the Google Block stuff a little later. We'll keep it simple. So let's make text appear, and then and an object. And so we need those two things. Let's draw something. We'll draw some cooler, interesting thing. Let's just do a cone. We're going to draw a cone later. That's fine. We'll make a pointed cone. We'll take a tube and draw a tube off of its side, and then we'll fuse them together like we did in one of the tutorials yesterday by selecting them both and hitting Control-T, and now they're, oops, oh sorry, Control-D, excuse me, I just said Control-T, Control-D as in dog, and we've got this, it almost looks like a hammer, so we've got our hammer, we'll call it, let me rotate it, yeah, we got a hammer, funny hammer, and we've got and then some text. So entities, we made the text before. We're going to draw text, make a text shape here, rotate it up, maybe put it here, and on the shape of the text, under its text mesh model, text shape, under its dot text, under the shape property, its text, we're going to say hammer, and let's not miss an opportunity to make it look like something other than Arial. Hammer, that's a pretty good hammer font. And let's give these things just some other color. If we're gonna actually make it dark gray, and then you can be more of like kind of an axe color. Anyway, and then lastly, just because we're gonna be doing this in VR in a second, we're gonna do make this grabbable. So you remember from earlier on interactions, we're going to go to grabbable fixed, and this will allow us to grab it with our lasers in and be able to throw it when we go into VR. So let's make these things appear and disappear with script, and then we'll check them out in VR. Oh, I forgot to move the light with those things. Alright, so let's move all these guys and that tree. Just move it back a little bit, make a little more space. Cool. So we're going to make the hammer and the text appear. So to make something appear, we need it to be disappeared to begin with. So I've got a lot of objects in this space, so I'm just going to scroll down. First of all, let's change the name of this. This is our hammer, so I'm going to change its name up here to hammer so you can understand better. And then this we'll call this the hammer label. So the hammer label is the text, and the hammer is the hammer. And we're going to say hammer label and hammer text are going to first be disappeared, and then they're going to appear. So to make something disappear, you're basically going to take its active property and make it false. So you'll see when I do that. I've selected on hammer. If I create active and I make it false, it is now disappeared. If I take the hammer label and take its active property and make it false as well, it disappears. And so now what I need to do is basically make that active property true inside of an interaction script. So here we go. I'm going to press the orange button, and I'm going to make these two things become active. So let's do that now. To make the interaction again, we're going to select our orange rounded cylinder entity. And we are going to, you guessed it, add interactable, select on press. Now we have the the function for this press event. So we need to bring in the hammer and the hammer label. Just like in the last one where we brought in the sky space, we need the hammer and the hammer label we need to access these. So we're going to access them directly using our kind of drag and dropping. So what I'm going to do is drag it from, this time from the hierarchy. You can drag it by selecting it from, selecting it in the space and dragging it from its property. You could drag it there, while we did with the last one. I'm going to drag this one in just from the hierarchy, so I can drag it like so, and in it comes, and it's going to say, hammer, I know where to find that object. Awesome. And now we need to drag in the label as well. So this time we're going to be changing properties on two things in one press event. So we've got hammer and hammer label. So what were we changing again on them? On the hammer, we're going to change its hammer dot active to true. And notice that false and true are spelled lowercase. That's important, and we're going to do that now. So this is uppercase H-A-M-E-R, and we're going to go active. The first word is lowercase, dot active equals, and we're going to say true. And we're going to press play and see if that works. Sure enough. Press play, click the orange, and our hammer comes into existence. And it's like suspended in air, so as soon as it gets activated, it like kind of falls, and physics gets it into its resting position against the terrain. Now let's make the hammer label active. Hammer, this also has an uppercase L, label dot active equals true. So we're just setting this property as well. Same thing. Press play, and now they're both happening. Awesome. So that's really pretty simple. The two things we've just done is set a property directly. And now I'm going to show you a function, and we're going to do it right here on the hammer itself, and then we'll check this out in VR to make sure that what we're doing is just to kind of sample that we're doing this right in VR, and then we'll continue with the other three. So hammer label. So what we're going to do is make this, basically you'll see that when we press play, they just surge into existence. They go from non-existent to immediately 100% existent. And there's a function in Simmetri that'll allow you to fade the object in. So let's take a look at how that would work. So instead of changing a property, we're going to run a little function inside of our press function. We're going to run here, when we press it, instead of just changing a property, we're going to run a function. We did this yesterday with our emitter. We emitted from an emitter, like firing kind of a cannon on a button press. We're going to do the same thing in here. And so that function is called, and we're actually going to delete these, but instead of deleting these, we're going to deactivate them. So here's a little lesson. You can use 2 hyphens to comment out in Lua. And comment out means whatever now has 2 hyphens in front of it, you'll see that it turns green here in Simmetri. This means that when this function runs, it's going to ignore this. This allows you to type things like, here's where I'm stuck. It's like a note that can go in here. You can also label like what you're doing and why. Make things active. But it also allows you to take lines of code and kind of make them get ignored. So we're going to write an alternative to this code, and we have done what we call commenting that out. So let's write our alternative to that code, which is for the hammer, we're going to fade in. So when you write a function, it's a function that applies to that object itself. So all the objects in Simmetri have a function for fade in, and that means you can do do this, and the object will fade in. So the way that you run a function that exists on the hammer is you write the object name, right? This variable name. Then you're going to use a colon to call the function. Calling the function means as the script is getting read by the computer, it says, "Oh, on the hammer there's a thing called fade in. Let me go do that. I'm gonna do that." And that fade in function actually basically takes the material that's on the hammer, the like visual representation, and sort of does a little animation across how transparent it is. And so this would be, you know, like a cross dissolve in video or something. And we'll do the same thing for the hammer label and see what this looks like. So hammer label colon lowercase f fade uppercase I in, and then open close parentheses. You're always going to have for any function, you're always going to have a colon and a set of parentheses, a colon and a set of parentheses. And then there's things that go inside that, which we'll learn more about later, but those are what are called arguments. And things that go in there, people say you pass in something to it, which is like, basically think about, you know, this is a processor, and this is where it gets like fed information that it's going to use to do that. This might be a number of seconds or something that we want this to fade in. But anyway, right now we're just going to see what it does with no quote-unquote arguments inside of its parentheses. So hammer colon fade in, hammer label colon fade in, and what does that look like? Press play, and yeah, you can kind of see them jump into position, kind of fade into position. And so that's the fading in. One of the things that I notice is the labels. It gets its shadows all at once, so I can actually remove shadows from my hammer label. If I take off cast shadows, I can make cast shadows false, and I'll get rid of those. So now it fades in. Boom. So you fade in an object. So we have our things appearing, and we want to now make things disappear. So that's we have them fading in, and we want to make them disappear. So like I said in the nighttime one, you know, we could recreate a button, go and make a brand new button, go and make a brand new interactable attribute and whatnot. But we could also just copy and paste this by cloning it, holding down Alt and then clicking and dragging. I'm going to change the color to, let's say, purple, complementing orange. Or actually not perfect complement. So this will be our disappear, make things disappear. Here, we'll go ahead and make this like this. Make things disappear. So we got appear and disappear. So on this one, right now, we are going to right-click on the purple one, the disappearing button, and hit Edit Code. And we're going to do a different function on these. It's another function that you can use that's called fade out, capital A and capital D, deactivate. And I'm going to copy this and do the same for my label. And then when I press play, orange, they become active. Purple, they fade out and they become deactive. Fading in, fading out, fading in, fading out. Awesome. So that was pretty simple, right? That we made it the first time, and then once we had the second, once we wanted to make the second one, we just held down Alt and clicked and dragged the mouse to make a second one, and it came in with the same code. It had an interactable attribute on it, it had an onPress event, and it had this label right here. sorry, it had these indicators that set this variable based on this finding. So it knew how to go get the hammer and the hammer label. It already had some old, quotes in it, and then I was just changed the two functions, and I was able to make a clone on it. So let's see if I can make these things work in VR. So everything we just did, where I can click things, now works the same with the lasers, and we should be able to demonstrate that. We need to then turn VR on. This is the VR mode. This means Simmetri is speaking to the VR system, and then this means that we're going to go into VR present mode. Nighttime. 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 Daytime. Nighttime. Oh yeah. The cool thing about when we learn how to animate, you'll see that when we animate these values later on from night to day, you'll see the stars kind of come out from behind the horizon. I'll make it daytime, come over here, make things appear. Yes, now I'm pressing buttons. Appear, disappear, appear, disappear. Awesome. So, like I said earlier, making things disappear and appear could be the basis of an entire... I'm hitting escape twice. Once puts me in pause time. Once puts me... second time puts me back in stop time and in the editor camera on the default camera on the terrain space viewport. Interrupted myself there. What I was saying was, yes, that making things appear and disappear is an awesome basis for building a variety of interactive experiences. You could make kind of really interesting stories. You could make really interesting kind of art museums, art galleries with your tilt brush or quill art, or any number of things. Okay, thanks for staying with me here. This is the fun one. No, they're all the fun one. This one's pretty fun. This one's extra fun. I love the audio stuff. It's extra. I think when I was doing filmmaking, my documentary filmmaking teacher told me, audio is like 80% of a movie, but people think about it 20% of the time. Producers, directors think about it 20% of the time. So I always love to see what I can do for a VR experience with spatial audio. And so Simmetri handles that. We're going to be doing a lot more on this later, and all the fun things that you can kind of do with audio in different ways. Right now, I'm just going to make one piece of audio play. And so I've got one little audio clip that I'm going to bring in, and I'm going to place it in the space on a speaker. And let me actually just make a dumb speaker. Oops. Let me make a dumb speaker for you, and then I'll bring in the sound. Here, entity. Let's do a rounded box, and we'll make it like so. And I'll make it about like yay, and I'll make it black. And then I will make entities. I'll make a cone. Let's make like a... This isn't going to quite make sense. I'll scale this like so, and then I'll rotate it, hitting E. I'm going to hold down Shift as I rotate it to make it stick to 90 degrees. I press W, switch back to move. I'm on the bottom plane. I'm on the side plane. Here. It's going to need to be a little smaller. I figure it's sometimes fun to just see how quickly you can kind of make things. And then I'm going to select them all, and I'm going to fuse them together using Control D as in dog, and we fused it together. So now we've got a speaker. If I hold down Control while I'm on move, I get to rotate. Okay, a nice dumb speaker. I kind of love it. And heck, let's make it so that I can throw it around when I go into VR. Again, that's interactions, grabbable fixed, and that'll allow me to throw it around as long as this object's rigid body is set to active and movable true. So now that grabbable lets me like pick it up and then throw it. Yeah, okay, so we've got a speaker. Let's do the audio part. So I'm going to bring in a clip, and I'm going to show you the function that plays the audio. So we're going to go to File. I'm going to use Import Raw, and I'm going to go to the desktop, and we've got some 30-day assets. Here's a little sound clip. It's an MP3. It's called earth.mp3. I got this from voices.com. It's a royalty-free library. We're going to hit Open. You didn't actually get to see it. It happened in the blink of an eye, but it kind of converted it. So now it's usable. What I'm going to do is bring Earth from now the library, from the browser. I'm going to drag it into the space where I want to place it. And I'm going to place it over here by the speaker. And when I press play, I won't be hearing it unless there's some other reason to hear it. So what I mean by that is you have to call a function on this, just like we did a function called like fade in on something. We need to call the play function on this to make it run. If you're tinkering around with the audio for the first time, take a look at the different options in the preference or in the property editor under autoplay. As an example, if we put it on timeline, the autoplay on timeline will mean that when the timeline, when this timeline plays, we're going to hear the audio play, and that should happen now. I assume that that you guys are hearing that. It can be a little tricky when we live stream this and with VR, but yeah, so that's on play. So that's just a little bit about the audio is this autoplay category. So you can make it play when I move it, when it gets copied or shot out of an emitter. So there's a lot of cool ways to kind of, active. Active is what we were just doing with that fade in, fade out. That's another way to kind of trigger the audio. These are sort of, and then on proximity, which is kind of cool. This meaning that that the audio gets triggered when the VR rig or the camera, whichever viewport you're in, gets near it, and it'll play. And inner radius is the place where this thing is at its full volume. You can change the volume here. Inner radius is like how close. Once you go away from the inner radius, it'll drop away. The sound will drop off, meaning it'll go from full volume to zero volume on a particular slope. So this controls the slope. Feel free to play with these on your own time. We'll go into much more depth about this later in the month. But for now, what we're going to do is, I think we're probably fine on volume, given I know you guys are hearing it and I'm not. But we're not going to change any of these properties. In fact, we're going to leave this to off the way that it came in. And what that means is that we're going to trigger, when it's off, it means we're going to trigger this audio using some script. And we're going to use an interaction script, just like any of these others. And we'll do that in 1 second. The other thing that I'm going to do is just, it's floating around here. I'm actually going to attach it to the speaker so that wherever the speaker goes, the audio goes with it. This might be something you want to do. If you want to have kind of sounds that you can toss around, or there's things in your space you want to position. You might have these might be full songs instead of just like a little audio, and you might want to place a bunch of songs or vocal like narrative tracks in different places, like while you're in VR. So putting them on top of something that's grabbable, like our speaker that we made, that we added this grabbability to it. When I drag this and do what's called childing, when I bring it kind of under the hierarchy of the mesh entity, it'll now move wherever that one moves. And as an example, I'm going to grab the Earth, the letters Earth right here in the hierarchy, and I'm just going to click and drag with my left mouse button on top, drag it onto mesh entity, and you'll see that it sort of says that with that pink box, it's like, oh, you want to be on the mesh entity, you want to be in this, you want to be a child of this and be here, and now it is. See, when I collapse this down, and again, always a good reason to label. I haven't been labeling all things, but here I can change. Sorry, like naming. That's a better way to say this than labeling, but naming this. So if I would call this now speaker, which is good. So the speaker is grabbable. This is the thing indicating that it's grabbable from that automatic interaction, and then it's got the earth audio on it. And I'm just going to kind of center the earth a little bit here on this object, so that the sound is kind of coming from its center. So I just moved it. But now what you'll see is that if I move the speaker, that purple guy's going with it. This is just like the VR rig. If you move the VR rig, the two controller hands, and the left hand, the right hand, and the headset go with it. In fact, that's exactly how you fly. You move the entire VR rig. Okay, so these objects all travel together as a group. Okay, so now we're going to press this button and play this sound. So we need to kind of connect that up. Well, just like we connected the other ones up, we're going to do the same thing here. Like we connected the sky space, and we connected our hammer and hammer text. So our interactable function, once again, here we go, play audio. We're going to select our yellow button, and we're going to come over to our triangle, add interactable, select interactable, hit on press. So in our on press event, it gives you one space. Like I said, I like to kind of open up some space inside the function. So when this guy gets pressed, earth, this audio called earth clip is going to play. So if I leave the script window, the window stays open. I'm going to grab earth from wherever. I can grab it from here or here. I'm going to go earth, and we're going to run a thing on earth. Earth, it is a sound object, and a sound object has a function called play on it, which means I can do what we did, like fade in, but I can also, on this one, I'm going to press colon and play, lowercase p, L-A-Y, and then open close parentheses, which means that this function says, oh, it's a sound thing, go make it play. And now when I press Simmetry's play button, and I click our yellow button here, assume that's playing for people. It'll also, one of the things you'll notice is that it gets louder the closer I get. Right, that's that inner radius at work. That's that fall off, rather, that fall off curve. And you could make it generally louder here. I won't do that for people, but you could make it generally louder, and you could change how far in the the world it is with the volume, that you can hear it with the volume drop off slope. One other function here that you'll just want to log is what's called play shared copy. And what this means is, I'll just tell you about the effect, and we'll learn more about it when we go into deeper audio. Play shared copy is going to give you a different sound. It'll allow, it doesn't restart when you change it. If this is play, it'll restart each time. But when I make it play shared copy, capital S, capital C, it'll play a totally new version of this clip every single time I press it, which allows you to have multiple sounds happening at once, as opposed to completely starting it again, which means you could, if if this were 3 minutes long and you press this like 10 times, you'd have 10 of these playing for like 3.5 minutes or whatever. So just to know, you've got play and play shared copy. We'll leave it at played shared copy because that one's, I don't know, kind of cooler, I guess. So we've got the play audio, and that's we're going to play that sound, and we can grab this and throw it away from us. I'll also teach you one other thing while you're here, since you're going to do this, which is Doppler effect. If you make that true, as you throw the sound away from you, you're going to get that shifting pitch based on the velocity away from you with the Doppler effect. We'll leave this on. It actually kind of makes it cool when you have this little setup of a thing that you can throw with audio on it. You should be able to kind of get a sensation of that here. Oops, let's do it like this. There, maybe. We'll hear it more in VR. Let's make something jump. So this, we're going to move into kind of a little bit of physics, and then last we'll learn one more thing in kind of the script world. So making something jump, this is going to be a physics function. So we're going to close our script window, and we're going to make a new one here. First, let's make our BFR. Maybe it's an LFR. We'll make a cylinder, and we'll make a cone on top of it. Select kind of in the center. It's enough of a rocket, and we're going to fuse these together with Control D. D as in dog. And now I forget how they did it in Looney Tunes. Which one was red? Over here, I made it the thing on top. You can come back into this by double-clicking. Once you've fused something, you can double-click on it, and you can change something in it. That'll work. I think this might be what it looked like. An Acme rocket. Yeah. Okay. So this thing is fused, which means that the cone and the cylinder work together. They are one rigid body. And now we're going to press the green button and make this thing shoot up in the air. Shoot up in the air means we're adding a physical impulse, an impulse to this physical object. And so we're going to show you how to do this in a couple of ways, but basically it's going to be sort of teaching a little bit about how you move through the code. So let's take a look. Again, we're going to select our button, magic little triangle here, add interactable, click on press. So in this one, I'm going to clear some space, and in this one, I need to talk to this specific part of our mesh entity. Let's go ahead and change it. We'll call it rocket. Okay, so selecting the rocket. I need to not just change its active property or do a simple function on it. I need to actually be talking to its rigid body. So I need to get down to the rigid body attribute. And I can do that one of two ways. We're going to do it the easy way, the sort of beginner way, which in this case, just like everything else, we drag it in. So rigid body, it's going to go do that find unique ID, which means it's getting a hold of this guy right here, this rigid body. And there's a function that I can call on a rigid body, which is called apply central impulse. And so I'm going to write it out. Rigid body, colon, so because it's a function, apply with a lowercase a, capital C, central, capital I, impulse, and then open close parentheses just for now. Then I'm going to come back into those open close parentheses. And a central impulse is a physical impulse on the very center of mass of this object. And we live in three-dimensional space here in Symmetry, and that force has to be pressing on it in three of those directions. how much is it pressing up, how much down, how much, or sorry, up, how much sideways, and how much forward. So how much, or how much X, Y, and Z, how much to the side, up, and forward is this pressing. So we're going to make this one go straight up, which means that it's going to go 0 in the X direction. It's going to go some interesting amount to overcome this thing's mass in the Y direction, some positive Y amount, and then 0 amount, in the Z direction, in like the forward direction. So we can't just write like, we're not going to write like 1x, comma, 2y, or like 0, x, something, y, and z. We're always going to go with x, y, and z, but in order for the central impulse to function, it needs a very particular thing in here. Remember when we hit print, it needed to have quotes around it. It needed to be what's called a string. This needs what's called a vector 3, or a three-dimensional vector. And we'll be getting into a lot more of this later, exactly. So right now, what you need to know is there's a little thing in Simmetri called, this is actually a little internal function that's called vector 3, and it has its own open and close parentheses. What this does is it takes in these numbers that I'm about to type in, the 0, comma, some amount in the upward direction, and then none in the Z direction. It takes your X, Y, and Z, and it makes them into this kind of special vector 3 object type. So the way you can think about this is, I've got this idea of how much I want to move, how much impulse I want to give to this thing. I want it to go 0 in X, 4 in Y, 0 in Z. So I need to send those into this little vector 3 function so it can spit out a vector 3 that has these little properties. That, in turn, living inside of these parentheses, is going to get now sent into and chewed up by this apply central impulse function, which is basically saying, oh, you said this is a vector 3. What I need to do is now give that impulse into the thing over here, to that rigid body. So that's a lot all at once. The end effect, when we press play, should be that we get the desired outcome. So we're applying a central impulse to that rigid body. It needs a vector 3, and these are the numbers we want to vector 3ify. Vector 3ify those numbers, central impulsify that vector, applied it to that rigid body, and that's the rigid body that is found here. That's a fairly weak impulse, so let's make that a 14 in the Y direction. Okay, not bad. Let's make that 140. Press play. There we go. And it's coming back. So, cool. So that's a little lesson about kind of types. The vector 3 is a type here in Simmetri, and the central impulse function wants that. It wants it to be in vector 3. And you can kind of, I love doing this simple function or things like it, really quickly and tinkering around with these values. We'll leave this at 14. Apply central impulse. So what did we do to get here? When we created this, this function, we pulled this rigid body in, and I'll drag it in again, and you'll see it's still finding the same one. So that's this really particular rigid body. But what if I don't have that, or I want to get there? What if I know this? Or, what if I need to kind of find the rigid body? What if I need to find the rigid body from the top level object? We'll call it top level object. So if I select the rocket, this is the top level object. And so if I say the top level object and I pull that in, that rocket, like we did with the other things. And I bring that in. How do I get the rocket's rigid body to be able to apply a central impulse to it? What I can do is a function on that object called rocket, running a function, and I'm going to say get rigid, capital R, body, capital B, open close parentheses. I can, once I have this is the equivalent of this, right? So this right here, this function returns this rigid body. It basically says this, oh, hey you, rocket, go get me your rigid body, get rigid body. It brings that rigid body back, and then it can apply the central impulse. So basically, if I connect these here by deleting this and bringing backspacing twice, I get the rigid body, rocket colon get rigid body, colon apply central impulse. So now we're getting a little bit more complex here, but the effect will be the same. So I press play, and we're still going and applying this these numbers get vector 3ified. They get central impulsified, and they go onto the rocket, what's returned when the rocket goes and gets its rigid body. So cool. So this is key in being able to get different things. You can get the mesh model and get the shape, and then you can change the shape of things, and we'll be doing all that in later versions. But just wanted you to see that you can either drag in the rigid body for this effect, or you can know the object, dragging in it and calling get rigid body, and then you can apply a central impulse to it all. So we are nearly to the finish. We're going to do the color change, and this is going to teach us about the self concept. And let's do that now. So for color change, what I actually did, and I'll show you because this is kind of clever, and it's similar to when we made these duplicate, or these kind of companion buttons that did two different things, the appear, disappear. We're gonna make a function that is copyable, which is yes, basically we're gonna make a script. Let's just say we're making a script that I can copy that'll have different effects. That'll have some different effects. So what we're gonna do is make this. We're going to make this text color change to the color that I select down here. So again, we're going to make one, and then you'll see that I clone these out, and it's just going to work automatically to change to the different colors. So we'll start by just trying to get it to change blue. So the way that we're going to do that is, at this point, you're sick of watching me do this. Interactable, select interactable, on press, and on this on press. We are going to need to get a whole. We're going to need to interact with this in our script, the color change text. Let's name it, just since we're color change text. So the color change text needs to make it into our onPress function. In this case, we're going to also just do the dragging in, and we see color change text, find my unique ID, and we've got a hold of it. So all of these basic entities that are over here in the toolbox that we put in text, or these buttons or anything like that, they have an object color right here that you can kind of shift. And right, if I've selected color and I come in here, you can see that I'm changing it and everything. So we'll start off with white. And what we're going to do is change this color to whatever this is. So what that means is I'm going to change this property. So this is color change text dot color, color change text dot color. The case here matches the case up here, and the dot color, the C is lowercase because it's, again, a property. It's going to be lowercase for the first word. You'll notice that it's yelling at me because I paused. This is not an okay sentence. This doesn't mean anything yet. I have to either say it equals something or something else. You'll see that it kind of yells at me. Don't worry about that. You'll see plenty of those as you move along. Color change text dot color needs to equal something. So how do I know what this thing's color is? Okay, let's think about this. First of all, this color is the color of the thing that we're pressing on. It's the one with the on press event. That's the button. So I need to know that the thing getting pressed, I need to go and get its color. So how do I go and get the color of the thing? How do I go and get the color of myself? If I'm running a function, here the press event on this object, how do I go and get my color? We use it called self. Self, and you'll watch it when I type in self all lowercase. You'll see it turns red because it's a special symmetry scripting word. Self is referring to the mesh entity itself. It's referring to, see, we're sitting here in the object script. It's referring to rounded cylinder and decopity 4. Let's just change this to blue button just for cleanliness sake. The blue button, in its script, if it says self, it's saying, oh, I mean me. Just the same way that color change text at this point means, oh, that object that I found, that I can find at this kind of address. So color change text dot color equals self dot color. That means the color change text, this text, equals the self, that's me blue button, self dot color. That means my color. So color change text dot color equals blue button or self dot color when I press. Let's see if we did it. Maybe I failed. Succeeded. See it again. Pressing, and we're blue. Cool. Very cool. So self is what's interesting, and I'll leave it to you as one of the challenges. Can I make this green object jump just at the same time that this rocket jumps using self? I bet you can. Self get rigid body. All right. So self, what's kind of cool about this is now instead of going and getting, you know, the exact object, the blue unique ID, it's self-referencing. So when I copy this, and this is when it gets interesting, when I copy this over and I change the color from red, let's see, blue, we'll go into green, and I make it green, and then right-click to edit code, just like those companion buttons. When I come into this one, we still go and get the color change text. And then we say, oh, let's set the color change text's color to self.color. It's the same words, but when the green one goes and gets its color, it goes and gets green. And when the blue one goes and gets its color, you'll see this is the same code. When it goes and gets its color, it's a different color. So when we press play, blue, green, blue, green, blue, green. So that's interesting. So now I can just make a bunch of these colors, and it'll keep working, won't it? Because self is the thing that's dynamic. It's dynamically changing from object to object, color change. So that concept opens up a lot of ideas, and I'll let you think about that for a little bit, based on the fact that an emitter or something in Simmetri can actually copy this at any given time, and if there's more than one of these things in the world, they can have different properties. One of the most obvious differences, these are different by color, but they're also different by transform. This one's they're all in different positions. So making scripts that involve the position of things using self can allow you to change their properties based on their position. So yeah. Okay, so we're gonna jump into VR just to sort of celebrate what we've created here, and look over it, and then we are off and onto creative question and answer sessions. So let's check this out. Oh, you'll notice I'm kind of flying slowly here. I'm actually gonna give you guys a little pro tip. If you do flying and you don't like the speed you're flying at, I've got an option for you. On your VR rig, where your fly is, which mine is under the left hand, under the index trigger, under fly, I can actually edit its code. And here, kind of like our other functions, not that many lines of code. You saw every single thing that we did today was like pretty much one or two lines of code, setting a single variable property or whatnot, or running a function. And here is where I can add some extra oomph to my flying around. And I will add it up to 12 and then fly around, and we will conclude today's lesson.
So Jukli actually asks from Discord, is there any other interesting light to show off between night and day?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Let's take a look at that. We'll do light stuff. Here's the audio, and so everything works. Oh, the last thing I was going to say is here, what you might want to try with any of these that we used on press events for is try on hovers. So this one might be kind of cool as you just hover, like that, and you'll change the color. So let's take a look at some light options. And I'm actually going to take a small break and let Amadeo show off some light options here, if he doesn't mind.
Sure.
Okay. And Amadeo's has even extra, he's got even more tricks up his sleeve, considering he invented the tricks.
Alright, so light options. Well, there's a lot of ways we can think of light options. For one, we can think of the sky as having lots of different characteristics. So we can play around with the atmosphere. That's one way to think of light. So let's see what happens if we play around with some of the atmosphere parameters. So to do this, I'm just going to click on the sky space, and when I click anywhere on the sky, it selects in the property editor the sky space. And so now what I'm going to do is mess around with some of the properties of the sky space. And in particular, I'm going to look under atmosphere. And so atmosphere is going to let us change, in this case, some of the parameters that dictate how light is scattered in the sky. And traditionally, light is scattered with such coefficients that we get a blue sky. But by playing with some of these parameters, we can kind of start to change some of that. And so in this case here, we're modifying this Rayleigh parameter, which determines the scattering coefficients of very, very small particles that are smaller than a molecule of water, basically. And so by changing that, we're determining how light is scattering by those really small particles, and we get this kind of interesting set of deep reds in this case. Likewise, I can play around with this Mie coefficient, and that determines those are particles larger than a molecule of water, and by playing around with that, we can get some other kind of effects here. So I'm just going to keep playing around with these coefficients here until we get some interesting effects here. So that's kind of interesting. We're now in this strange red world. Because that light ultimately dictates, those coefficients also dictate how the light comes through the sky from the sun. And so in this case, they're kind of causing the light to turn red. And so another thing we can play around with is this diffusion parameter. And also another thing to take in consideration is your surface location, your latitude and your elevation can also really affect how the light is scattered. So for instance, if I set the elevation to 1, that's like... The way to think of this number is it's like 0 is like I'm on ground level, and 1 is like I'm outside the atmosphere of the planet, basically along the edges of the atmosphere of the planet. So all the way at 1 here, it's as if like we're on a very, very high mountain. And so as you can see, the atmosphere up here is very, very light. And in fact, we can kind of see the sun is not even scattering. It's not even creating a very big halo because there's nothing in the atmosphere to cause it to scatter. And so it turns into a kind of a point in the distance. Which is interesting. So here it's like we're up high up in the atmosphere, up past the stratosphere, really, really high up. And as we kind of come back down to Earth here, if we change our latitude, for instance, right now we're kind of in the northeast is the latitude. But if we set it all the way, for instance, to the polar caps, by setting the latitude to be kind of closer to 90 degrees, we're kind of on one of the northern or the southern polar caps here. We can see that, for instance, the time of day, if we play around with the time of day, in this case, we barely get any sunlight as we shift the time of day. And depending on the time of year, if we're all the way in the middle of the time of year, we only have sunlight. We actually never goes to darkness. And so actually, you can kind of get a sense of a little bit of how the sun and the Earth's rotation and the tilt and all these things kind of relate by kind of looking around at these parameters. So that's one way to think of light. Another way we can think of light is as with local light sources, and so Max played around a little bit here with this spotlight here that he connected with this button here that we were turning on and off. And if actually we go ahead and hit play and check that out, the time of day is shifted here using these new atmospheric parameters and the rotation. So when we change the time of day, now we're kind of in the afternoon, what appears to be kind of the afternoon. But what we're going to do is I want to go to even darker night so we can kind of play around at the nighttime here. So I'm going to shift our latitude to be a little bit more on the equator, and then I'm going to make it so that we're kind of in the dark here. So in this case, we can kind of nicely see our light source since we have proper darkness. And by selecting the light source, I'm going to now kind of boost some of its parameters here. So for instance, the color is the straightforward one. We're just changing the color of the light. The intensity makes it nice and bright. We also have this area radius. You can think of the area radius as kind of a radius around the spotlight where the light is at 100%. And so if we set the area radius to, let's say, 10, you can imagine there's a radius of 10 around the spotlight, which is like a big sphere. Everything inside there is at maximum brightness, and then outside of that, the light drops off using an inverse square principle, which is basically light kind of will drop off based on its distance to the light source by the inverse square of that distance. So it tends to have this kind of non-linear drop-off. It kind of drops off this kind of S-curve. But within that radius, it's at total brightness. And so if we actually go and look up, we'll see the light is shining right in our face here through these lens flares. But anyways, the area radius parameter is a good way to just like boost light. The intensity is a little bit more gradual, but the area radius allows you to kind of really crank that up really fast if you want to just test something. Another parameter here that we can do is, this is a spotlight, but if we turn off the spotlight, it turns into a point light source. So now we have kind of shadows all around. And again, likewise, we'll play around with this area radius. Now it gets super bright, and our lens flares kind of get too intense there. You can actually turn off those lens flares if you don't like them. Each light source has a visible flare option that you can just set to false, and then it doesn't blind you necessarily. Back to the spotlight. I'm going to turn that back on. You can play around with the size of that spotlight, so you can make it much more like narrow, like a spotlight. So it's a lot more targeted now. We can also change the softness of the edges of that spotlight with this hardness parameter. Because it's so bright, you don't really see the softness very well, but if I knock down the brightness, you'll start to see it a little bit more. So the hardness here, this is very hard. It has just a very distinct hard edge. If I set that back down to 0, it gets really soft, the edge. Another cool thing we can do is set a projection texture. So if I load a texture for this, I'll look into my little mosh pit of textures here. We'll project this banana texture here. You can actually project this onto various objects. So that's another thing we can do is we can project that. And we can also show you in a later lesson how to project a dynamic texture, so like a TV or something like that. We can project that out as well. Another thing that causes light to interact kind of interestingly is fog. So if we click on our sky space, you'll see that one of the parameters here is fog, and if we set the density to be non-zero, you'll start to see volumetric fog kind of come out. So you can get these cool shadows that are casted through the volumetric fog. You can see it a little bit there, and in this case, it's also projecting out our projection texture. So here we'll create another one. I just made a copy of that, and we put that around there, and then maybe we'll very quickly here. I'm going to just like take all this stuff, and I'm going to just I'm going to take these two light sources, which are on a parent light source here. Oh, no, here we go. I'm just going to take these two. I'm going to group these together, and then I'll put a little animation in that group to do like a spinny kind of light source here. So I'm going to go Tool, Group Selected Objects. Now they kind of live as one. Oh, you have it on. Select Show them directly. Okay, so now these live as one. And then I'm going to just set a transform signal here. Sorry, I'm going to rush into this a little bit, but we'll get more into these details tomorrow on a future lesson here. I'm going to do a waveform signal, and now we have this weird spinny light here in the dark here with these projected textures. So that's some other light considerations. Other things that you might want to consider that affect light are the exposure layer on the viewport here. So the viewport kind of determines what I'm looking through. Right now I'm looking through this terrain space viewport, this particular camera here. But it has an exposure layer, and this exposure layer determines how light is ultimately kind of exposed on the kind of the sensor of the camera, so to speak, that's reaching the screen that you're looking at it. And through this exposure, if you click on it, it has its own little properties here, and some of those properties are control bloom. And so bloom is how light that's too bright to be represented by the display is then diffracted and distributed across those pixels near that. So what do I mean by that? You see these lasers here, they're very, very bright, and they're so bright that it bleeds into neighboring pixels on our display. And you can control those effects through this exposure layer here on the viewport. And so you can actually set it to be like different styles here. This is kind of more of a star kind of cross style. So really bright things. If I create like a cube here and then set its color to be super, super bright, you can do that through this HDR intensity. You'll see that eventually it turns into the star pattern as it overexposes. And in this case, it's flashing because it's being illuminated by our spotlights. So it's reflecting that light, and then that light is super bright. But if we take these cubes here and just make lots of copies of them, now we have kind of a dance party thing kind of going on here with these like super bright cubes. So that's another way to think of light, is how that light is being exposed on that exposure layer. So I think that takes care of some of the light things. That was a great question. I think light is complicated in terms of there's so many different things that interact with light, and so understanding it involves kind of understanding a bunch of different things, from the way the sun and the sky, the light comes in from there, from local light sources and exposure, and how that light eventually makes its way onto your eyes, onto your screen. So great question. Thanks for it, Jukli.
Pause for a second. Let's see what that looks like in VR. Does it look absolutely insane?
Let's go. Let's take a look. It feels pretty weird. It's
oh, here. Yeah, there you go.
Super bright. As we go really close, you're kind of blinded here. This mysterious spotlight here. I'm going to switch back. Time of day here. Oh, back in the day. And
you should be able to.
And you can actually see the light kind of coming through the terrain as well here. The fog here is like a nice little kind of effect that are coming through. So volumetric fog also will occur kind of from the sunlight, not just those local spotlights. But yeah.
Cool.
Pretty cool. All right, so we're going to wrap up this lesson officially, but we're going to be taking requests. If anybody else has any requests, and we'll start a new live stream so we can kind of index these videos separately. So we're signing off here, but thanks for watching, and keep the requests coming.